The villagers of Trelling believed they understood the sea. They believed they could read its moods, the way the waves rose when storms approached, the way seabirds circled before sudden wind, the way the tide retreated when something disturbed the deep world beneath. But on the night the Vikings came, the sea didn't warn them. It went silent, truly silent, a stillness, so profound it pressed against their ears like a hand. Dogs whimpered. Lanterns flickered though there was no wind. Even the moon seemed dimmer, dull behind a veil of haze. The village's old priest, Father Aaron, stepped outside his chapel and stared toward the horizon, clutching the wooden cross at his neck. The sea was flat as glass. Then, without warning, the horizon changed. Its dark line thickened, no, multiplied. Not waves, not clouds, not land. Sails, red sails, painted with symbols that glowed faintly even from a mile away. Wolves' heads, serpents' horns, axes, ravens. The shapes merged into a drifting wall of crimson that slid across the water with unnatural rhythm. No waves crashed beneath the longships, yet they cut across the surface with the speed of hunters. 20 ships, then 30, then 40. At their head, a monstrous vessel whose sail bore a single pale rune, stark and jagged like a lightning strike. The crest of Jarl Jorn Skerriksson, known from Brittany to the Baltic as Jorn the Tidebreaker, the man who spared prisoners, the man who marked them, the man whose captives returned changed, silent, feared even by their own families. The villagers had heard stories whispered in taverns and monasteries, stories about ink that didn't wash away, runes that glowed in moonlight, and marks that carried some unspeakable significance. Stories of prisoners released not as survivors, but as warnings. Most thought the stories exaggerated. Tonight, they would learn otherwise. The longships reached shore without a sound. Not a single Viking shouted. No horns blew. The warriors disembarked in perfect silence, as if performing a ritual rather than launching a raid. Torches lit the cliffside as shadows leapt and merged. Jarl Jorn himself stepped onto sand. He was not the giant some legends claimed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but not monstrous. What chilled his enemies was not size, but presence. The cold steadiness of his gaze, the composed rhythm of his breath, the measured way he examined the village as though reading a book he had studied before. Behind him walked Elder the Skald, keeper of sagas, robed in dark wool, and carrying a long wooden case sealed with iron clasps. Inside was a relic, the object that defined Jorn's power, the marking staff. As Jorn surveyed the village, he raised one hand. No war cry followed, only motion. His warriors spread like dark water through the streets, opening doors, gently but firmly subduing families, binding them with braided hemp cords. No screaming, no killing, no fire, terror through precision. Within an hour, 50 villagers knelt in the square, nobles visiting from inland, farmers, fishermen, a monk on pilgrimage, even 3 children huddled close to their mother. Father Aaron stepped forward, shaking. "Please, take our food, our coin. Spare them." Jorn studied him with unsettling calm. "I am not here for food," he said, "nor coin, nor killing." "Then what do you want?" Jorn nodded to Eldred. She placed the wooden case before him and opened it. Even the warriors bowed their heads. The villagers could not understand why. It was only a staff, carved from driftwood, polished smooth. Yet the runes etched along its length seemed alive, shifting subtly in the firelight. Or perhaps that was only imagination. But something about it demanded attention. Respect. Fear. Jorn spoke quietly, but his voice carried. "The kings of the South have forgotten the North. They have forgotten our strength, our presence, our reach." He lifted the staff. "So I will remind them." One of the nobles spat. "We will not give you tribute." Jorn smiled faintly. "I do not want tribute." A murmur of confusion spread. "I want witnesses." He stepped toward the first captive, a fisherman. He lifted the man's chin and studied him with the slow deliberation of a sculptor preparing to carve marble. "You fear what I will do to you," Jorn said. The fisherman nodded. Jorn shook his head. "No, I will do nothing." Then he dipped his fingers into a bowl Eldred had placed beside him, filled with dark ink that shimmered strangely, as though tiny stars flickered within it. He drew a single rune on the man's forehead, a simple mark. No pain, no blade, no burn. The fisherman gasped nonetheless, as if sensing something deeper than touch. "You are marked," Jorn said. The villagers stared, bewildered. What did it mean? Why? Jorn answered their fear with chilling clarity. "You will return home. You will walk among your people. They will see this mark. They will ask what happened. They will wonder what the rune means. And when they cannot answer, they will fear." He looked across the kneeling captives. And fear spreads faster than fire. The marking continued, prisoner by prisoner. Each rune was different. Some straight as spears' hafts, others spiral like distant storms. Others mirror constellations unseen in southern skies. When the last villager had been marked, Jorn stepped back. "You are my messengers," he said. "Through you, my name will cross kingdoms." And just like that, the Vikings gathered the prisoners, ushered them toward the longships, and vanished into the sea before dawn, leaving Trelling untouched. No buildings burned. No bodies lay in the streets. Not a drop of blood spilled. Yet the village was more shaken than any raid could achieve. They had been chosen, and they did not yet know for what. The journey north was brief, but every moment felt stretched thin with dread. The prisoners sat on the longships, not chained, not beaten, but watched, always watched. Jorn's warriors rode in silence, their rhythm perfect. The absence of speech was worse than shouting. It made the captives feel like objects, cargo, vessels containing some hidden message. The runes drawn on their foreheads glimmered faintly in moonlight. Some tried to wipe them away. They did not smudge. The monk, Brother Alwyn, whispered prayers under his breath. The nobleman tried to bargain. The children sobbed silently while their mother held them close. But Jorn never spoke to them. He had already said all that mattered. On the third night, they reached a small island, barren rock, no settlement, no trees, only a wide stone platform carved by ancient hands. Eldred addressed the captives. "You will return from here," she said. "This is where your paths separate." The villagers exchanged confused, frightened looks. Return? How? Before they could ask, the Vikings began unloading crates, not weapons, but bundles of food, water skins, and cloaks. Jorn finally approached. "I need you alive," he said calmly. "A dead messenger delivers nothing." Sir Edrin, the nobleman, demanded, "What purpose do these marks serve? Why us?" Jorn regarded him as one might regard a stubborn child. "Have you ever tried to conquer a kingdom?" he asked. Edrin sputtered. "Of course not." "Then listen," Jorn said. "Armies win battles. Stories win wars." Edrin blinked. "Stories? Yes." Jorn circled the captives slowly. When a king hears of raiders, he prepares. When he hears of 100 raiders, he gathers soldiers. But when he hears of a threat he cannot name, Jorn tapped Edrin's forehead with a rune lay. He becomes afraid. He gestured at the others. "These marks are not curses. They are symbols. But none of your people will know their meaning. So they will invent meanings. They will imagine horrors. They will whisper legends." He stepped back and raised a staff. "And legends are stronger than armies." The villagers trembled. Jorn's warriors then divided the captives into groups and loaded them onto smaller crafts, hide-covered skiffs, each crewed by only 2 Vikings. The plan was clear. Scatter them. Send each group home to a different village, a different province, a different kingdom. By the time they returned, stories would spread like wildfire. Brother Alwyn, his voice shaking, asked, "What happens if we tell the truth? That you only drew ink upon us?" Jorn stared at him, then smiled not cruelly but knowingly. "Humans do not fear the truth," he said softly. "They fear what they do not understand." The monk lowered his head. "And these runes," Jorn continued, "they are ancient symbols of identity, reflection, memory. Even if you tell your people what they mean, your people will not believe you. They will decide for themselves." He pointed at the sea. "Return, carry my mark. Let your people choose their own fear. And with that, the prisoners were ferried away. Some landed on familiar shores, some on strange ones. Some wandered for days before finding home. But everywhere they went, something unexpected happened. Their families recoiled. Their friends stared. Their priests panicked. Do not touch them. That mark, it glows. It is a curse. It binds their soul. It summons storms. I've heard it can't be washed away. I've heard it spreads. I've heard it means they belong to the Viking gods. The prisoners tried to explain. They said the marks were painless, harmless, just ink. No one believed them. The first rumor started within hours. The first myth by nightfall. The first panic by dawn. The runes traveled faster than any ship, faster than any message, faster than any truth. And Europe trembled. Within a month, reports of the marked ones reached the Frankish court. The king's advisors debated wildly. Are they spies? Scouts for invasion? Harbingers of plague? Chosen by the Viking gods? Cursed, none of the advisors dared touch the captives. Some captives were imprisoned, some expelled, some locked in monasteries until the priests could cleanse them. None of the marks faded. Even when the ink washed away, the idea remained. The psychological scar was permanent. Anyone who had bore a rune on their brow was watched with distrust forever after. Then the strangest reports began. Some captives swore they could sense storms before they came. Others dreamed in Norse phrases they did not understand. A few became inexplicably calm, even in crisis. Others became deeply anxious, as if haunted by unseen eyes. Were these real changes or effects of fear? Europe could not tell. But every kingdom agreed on one thing. Bjorn Skarriksson had created a new kind of weapon, a weapon of uncertainty. The church declared the markings blasphemous. Kings declared them symbols of war. Merchants avoided towns where marked ones lived. Villagers whispered that the runes could bring raiders to any doorstep. And fear grew. Fear of the mark. Fear of the unknown. Fear of Bjorn, which, of course, was exactly his intention. Among the marked prisoners returning to their homelands, there was one who refused to let fear dictate his fate. Elgar, a scholar from Trelling. Unlike the others who hid, whispered, or fled, Elgar observed, memorized, and reflected. He bore the rune on his forehead like a brand of destiny, yet he would not allow it to define him. From the moment Bjorn's ink touched his skin, Elgar sensed the power of what had been done. The mark was subtle, but its effect was undeniable. Those who saw it immediately recoiled, unsure why their eyes burned with unease. It was the quietest, most insidious form of terror, a symbol whose meaning no one could fully grasp, and in that uncertainty lay its strength. As he journeyed home, Elgar watched towns, villages, and monasteries respond to his presence. Fear spread faster than the wind, carried by whispers, conjecture, and superstition. Traders crossed to the other side of the street. Children were pulled behind their mothers. Priests avoided his gaze, muttering prayers that failed to calm their unease. Yet Elgar did not panic. Instead, he began documenting everything. The raids, the rituals, the Jarl's calm authority, and the way his warriors had marked each captive. He wrote down every word. He remembered Bjorn speaking, every gesture, every methodical motion of the marking staff. Even the subtle shift of the runes under torchlight were recorded in meticulous sketches. When Elgar finally reached the monastery near his village, he presented his accounts to the head abbot. The monks listened, but skepticism warred with fear. Some insisted it was exaggeration. Others whispered that Elgar had been enchanted, cursed, or recruited as a secret agent of the Northmen. I tell you the truth, Elgar insisted. These runes do not curse the body. They do not strike the flesh. They strike the mind. Every person who sees them, every village that witnesses them, feels it, even if they cannot name it. The fear itself is the weapon. Yet even as he spoke, Elgar realized a paradox. The more he explained, the more the legend grew. People did not want clarity. They wanted fear. By naming Bjorn's strategy, he had amplified it. Europe, in its desperation to understand, filled in the gaps with myths far more terrifying than reality. Some claimed the rune glowed at night. Some whispered that it summoned storms. Others insisted it bound the souls of the mark to the Jarl himself. And still, Elgar wrote, he knew that the mark would outlive the individual, that every whispered tale of it, every terrified glance toward a marked person, would cement Bjorn's strategy in legend. But unlike other captives, Elgar refused to submit to silence. He composed letters, detailed reports, and illustrated manuscripts. He sent them to kings, dukes, and scholars alike, explaining what had happened, how it happened, and what it truly meant. The paradox remained. By attempting to inform the continent, he became part of the story. His words, meant to educate, were twisted by fear. But Elgar refused to stop. He continued to travel, seeking out other marked prisoners, collecting their testimonies, compiling patterns, and attempting to map the reach of Bjorn's psychological dominion. By the winter's end, Elgar's work had reached the courts of multiple kingdoms. Kings read his manuscripts with apprehension. They saw not only the power of the Vikings' longships, but also the deeper, invisible network of influence the runes created. Villages far from the coast had been affected indirectly, through rumors, sightings, and the subtle whispers of returning prisoners. Even those who did not understand Bjorn's magic recognized the principle. Symbols could carry power beyond armies, beyond walls, beyond steel. The fear spread by the runes became a psychological contagion, transmitted from village to town to castle. And though Elgar could see the fear, he also saw opportunity, a way to turn knowledge into defense, to prepare Europe for what Bjorn would try next. But the Jarl himself remained unseen. He moved along the coast, collecting tribute from smaller villages, launching raids only when necessary to maintain his reputation. Bjorn knew the Europeans feared the unknown more than the known, and he wielded that uncertainty like a weapon, letting it ripple outward to the continent like invisible tides. Yet for every act of fear, there was resistance. Elgar, through his meticulous records and growing network of scholars, began sowing seeds of strategy. Not soldiers, not swords, but knowledge, understanding, and preparedness. Slowly, kingdoms coordinated, watchtowers signaling fires, fleets reinforced, and coastal patrols organized. Europe began to respond, not with panic, but with quiet, calculated vigilance. Bjorn noticed a change. When he returned to previously harvested regions, he saw watchfires burning along cliffs, scouts observing the horizon, and villagers whispering caution rather than fleeing. The psychological advantage was slipping. The marking staff still held symbolic power, but Europe was beginning to understand its patterns, its methods, and its weaknesses. Elgar became the unintentional catalyst. The messenger who refused to remain silent had transformed fear into preparation. Europe's leaders realized that even a symbol could be countered with strategy, knowledge, and unity. And so the stage was set for the final confrontation. Bjorn, the tidebreaker, would sail again, expecting terror. But this time, he would find a continent no longer paralyzed by myth, no longer willing to be frightened by shadows. The invisible tide he had wielded for decades was facing a human wave, organized, aware, and determined. The spring winds carried Bjorn's fleet south, just as rumors of his movements had spread through every port and village. The longships, each with their crimson sails and carved prow, glinted in the morning sun, as if the sea itself had become molten bronze. But the waters were no longer silent. Every kingdom along the coast had learned to watch, to signal, to prepare. Europe's fear had hardened into readiness. When Bjorn approached the coast near what was once Trelling, he saw the watchfires, the scouts, and the fortifications that had been rebuilt along the cliffs. His lips curled in something between amusement and disbelief. Even now, he underestimated the humans whose minds he had sought to control. He ordered his ships to slow, to assess. From the cliffs, a line of archers appeared, their bows drawn. Across the water, cavalry units marshaled behind hastily constructed barricades. Fireships, small vessels designed to ignite the longships, drifted on the currents, waiting. Bjorn's hand rested on the marking staff. He remembered Elgar and the other witnesses, all dispersed across Europe. He felt the familiar thrill of psychological advantage, and yet unease crept in. The human wave he had underestimated had grown more organized, more intelligent than any individual village could have been. His fear of unpredictability had once worked in his favor, but now it was mirrored in the enemy's strategy. The first clash was swift. Fire ships were sent toward the lead vessels, setting ablaze the wood and smoke. Archers on the cliffs unleashed a torrent of arrows, aimed not to kill indiscriminately, but to disable and slow. The northern wind carried smoke into Bjorn's face, stinging eyes, obscuring vision. The tide he had once dominated now seemed hostile, aligned with the defenders. Bjorn called orders, precise and sharp. His warriors moved with the same silent efficiency that had struck so much terror in Europe. They tried to board the defensive fortifications, but the defenders were ready. Each move was anticipated. The markings, once a tool of fear, could not shield his fleet from strategy. Bjorn realized a paradox. His greatest weapon had become irrelevant when the people who once feared him had united and learned. The battle stretched for hours. Long ships were burned or sunk. Warriors fell. Smoke and chaos filled the air. And then, from the cliffs, a signal, a coordinated strike from several kingdoms, forced Bjorn to retreat. But even as he ordered withdrawal, he knew that his legend would endure. The marking staff, the runes, and the terror they produced could not be erased overnight. Europe had resisted. Yes, but the memory of fear remained. Bjorn himself vanished that day. Some said he drowned. Others claimed he escaped into the northern fjords, alive and scheming. But no one saw him again for years. His fleet was scattered, his psychological dominion weakened. But the marks he left, on minds, on villages, on histories, endured. Elgar's manuscripts circulated widely after the battle. The European kingdoms read them, learned from them, and passed down the knowledge for generations. They had not defeated Bjorn through brute force alone. They had countered the intangible weapon he wielded, fear, with knowledge, observation, and preparation. The marked prisoners became legends themselves. Some rose to positions of authority, teaching others about the subtle weapons of influence. Others lived quietly, wary of whispers, yet proud that they had survived. And in every tale, the story of the tide-breaker persisted. A man who could strike terror without touching a blade, who could reshape the fear of entire kingdoms through symbols and stories. In the end, the lesson was clear. Power often lies not in bloodshed, but in perception. Bjorn had demonstrated it with precision. Europe learned it with caution. And the marking staff, whether lost at sea or hidden in some fjord, remained a symbol. A reminder that fear can travel faster than ships, and legends can outlast the warriors who create them. And so, centuries later, when bards sang of the Vikings, when chroniclers wrote their histories, and when children whispered in fear and awe, one story persisted above all others, of the Jarls who marked their prisoners, not with pain, but with fear itself, and of the continent that learned to resist, one mind at a time,